Up, in, and out. I doodle those 3 words on the margins of worship bulletins and in the corners of legal pads when I should be taking notes on something else. Sometimes in the space right at the bottom of meeting agendas. Up, in, and out. For me, up, in, and out is a shorthand for a way of doing a spiritual checkup on myself, like a well baby check. I assume I'm a well baby, but I'm just doing a little scan, up, in, and out. And it's a pretty useful tool. And so we're going to be talking about up, in, and out for the next several weeks. It's not just a good individual tool either. It can be good for a collective as well. So put a pin in that. Think about our shared life together. Here's how it works. Ready? Okay, first, I focus my attention on how I've connected with God recently. So my experience of transcendence. That could be out on an early morning walk, witnessing the beautiful light through the leaves of the trees. It could be with a soaring, amazing choral anthem. My heart just bursts into connection with something bigger than myself. It could be in prayer or in the study of scripture or in a one-on-one conversation with someone. But that experience of transcendence, of connection with something higher than myself. How often am I having that? If I notice that I'm feeling a little bit dry or overwhelmed by minutia, does anybody else ever feel overwhelmed by minutia? Yes, Wendy, you are my soulmate. Some people love minutia. I get overwhelmed. Those kinds of things, that overwhelm or that dryness is a signal to me that I could use a little bit more connection on the up front. I need a little more transcendence. Okay? That's up. Next, in. Okay, in this step, I'm checking on my connection with myself and those who are closest to me. Okay. Our close relationships with close family and friends and people who are in our inner circle, these are some of the places that God does the most important work. Let me say that again. God does some of the most important work in our lives through our closest relationships. Okay? That's why it's so important for me to take time to notice, how am I doing in? How am I doing in the inner circle, within myself? How often am I fully present at family dinner? How connected am I? Am I making sure that on those walks to school, on school days, that my kiddo knows that he has my full attention? How about checking on my mom or my dad or people who are important to me, but I don't always spend time connecting with them like I need to, right? How am I doing on that? Also, for me personally, have I had a good night's sleep recently? Usually, but sometimes that gets out of whack too. How about exercise? How about healthy eating? How am I doing in? Okay? All right. Okay, last but not least, out. In this step, I observe how my life is connecting with people beyond my inner circle. Okay? So what I believe is that God moves through us, opening up channels for love to pour out into our workplaces, into our neighborhoods and our schools, and even into our natural habitats. Our lives are like channels for God's healing grace and love to move out into the world. So when I'm checking up on out, I'm looking at things like this. How often am I offering grace to my neighbors? In like the big N sense. How often am I extending grace to my colleagues? Caroline, you got it. All the grace you need. How often am I, and likewise, she's abundantly graceful to me. Oh my gosh. How am I doing at aligning our family budget with our values, right? Can you look at our bank statement and see justice making and peace seeking in our family budget? How closely is that channel of our connection with the world aligned with what God is trying to do in the world, right? If not, maybe there's some opportunities for growth there, right? So up, transcendent, in, how are these relationships doing? And then out, how open are the channels, right? Okay, that's it, up, in, and out. Now, if any one of those elements is underdeveloped or kind of languishing, which happens like most of the time, most of us are not in perfect spiritual balance at all times, right? If one of those things is underdeveloped or out of sync, like a bike with one tire is a little flat, right? We can feel itchy, or dissatisfied, or just that kind of, everything's just not quite as sabroso or flavorful as it should be. It's just missing something, right? And I believe that's our Spirit's way of nudging us into action, saying, you're not supposed to stay here. Where you are right now doesn't feel like the kingdom. It's not your home. Nudge, nudge, nudge. Where's that growth about to happen? Pay attention to it, okay? So that's why I think this could be a useful tool for us as a congregation and as individuals. So over the next several weeks, we'll be applying this up and out lens to our life together as a congregation. And we'll do it through this worship series that's focused on the Acts of the Apostles. Now, the Acts of the Apostles is the story of the early church. It's the second volume to Luke's gospel. So did you know that the Gospel of Luke is a two-part deal? There's the gospel story of Jesus' life, and then the Acts of the Apostles is sort of part two. What happened after Easter? What happened after all that came to pass, right? Okay, so what we see through this story is how the early church had to figure out what it meant to follow a risen Christ, just like we have to figure that out. But they had no roadmap whatsoever, nothing. No one saying, well, this tends to work for, a couple of millennia, this has been useful, try that. They had no up in and out. So they had to figure this out for themselves, right? And so we'll tell the stories of how they found their way and brought their shared life into spiritual balance as they did. And I have a feeling that we're going to pick up some pretty key tips along the way. So don't miss this. You're going to want to be here. All right, let's start with the story of Saul and Ananias. Let's dig into the text. This is an amazing story. Who is Saul? Okay, Saul is one of these guys who had everything figured out. He was master of his own universe. He was a leader in the Jewish establishment in Jerusalem. He was also a Roman citizen. This guy, knew some stuff. He was very well educated. He had tons of charisma. And he knew that his job was to cleanse the synagogues of all this heretical nonsense, these people talking about Jesus. That was his one mission in life. That was it. And so he was. He had even a letter from the chief priests back in Jerusalem, endorsing his mission. Go cleanse the temple, or cleanse the synagogues, the local gatherings of Judea all across the diaspora, all around the Mediterranean. So he was out doing this work. And funny thing happened to Saul. We heard the story this morning. So he's on the road to Damascus. He's going out from Jerusalem to do this work that he believes he is deeply called to. And all of a sudden, Saul, breathing threats against the Christians and murder, has this overwhelming experience of the risen Christ. Jesus just shows up to him and just floods him with clarity about how wrong he's been to persecute the early Christians. And it's like this flash of insight in which suddenly he just sees himself and everything differently. He realizes that he might be wrong. And if he's wrong, the consequences become mind-boggling. If he's wrong about this one key thing, everything has to change. And it's so much, he can't process it. It's like his whole system just kind of implodes, and he just, I'm picturing him just kind of, whoop, Saul goes offline. Everything kind of just falls apart for him. The way the story is told, his friends lead him by the hand. Here was this guy who had it all figured out. Here we go. And his friends are like, okay, we got to find some place to stay because this guy is swamped. What is going on? Okay, that's an experience of the transcendent like nobody's business. In fact, this might be the up experience of all time, right? Knocked off of his feet is Saul, right? Okay, and once he's had this experience, this transcendent experience of the risen Christ bursting into his life, disrupting all of his categories, he can't reset to what he was like before. He just can't do it. He can't unexperience Jesus. He has to deal with what he knows now. And that's a lot. It's a lot to process. Okay. So the author of the book of Acts says that Saul goes off to this guy's house, or gets led to a house to kind of just regroup. But what I notice about this is that none of this is happening alone, right? He has his companions to help him get there, and there is a house for him to go to recover. So just stick a pin in that too. Notice that for a minute, okay? So Saul gets led to this house in Damascus, and a man named Judas lives there, and the story says that he prays. Saul gets there and he prays. He could do nothing else, but he could pray, and so he does. And the way I'm imagining these prayers happening, I'm imagining that there's this sort of new level of humility, maybe, in Saul's prayers. Maybe he's doing a little bit less talking to God and a little more listening, right? Opening some space that hadn't been there before. Right? In his bewilderment, I'm imagining Saul waiting and listening for guidance. It's different. Help comes. The guidance comes. God sends Ananias to Saul. Now, Ananias is a man who would have absolutely been on Saul's list for arrest. Like, definitely on Saul's list to arrest. And he comes anyway. He lays his hands on Saul. And he calls him brother. And at Ananias' words and at his touch, something like scales fall from Saul's eyes. And his sight is restored. He sort of returns to himself. And he sees a new way opening right in front of him. Okay. So from an up, in, out perspective, I see a few things happening here. Might be useful for us. Okay, first, Saul and Ananias both have a really strong up connection, right? They both have these open lines of communication with God just standing at the ready. Prayer is a regular part of both of their daily lives. They're both very faithful in their practice. They're open to the Spirit's guidance because of that openness to God, and they have this sort of well-exercised humility that's just the fruit of the Spirit that comes with an active prayer life. Their listening muscles are sharpened by that practice of prayer. And so when the Spirit does come speaking to them, when the risen Christ does come, when God speaks into Ananias' life, they're ready to hear it. And they're prepared to receive that guidance and to turn another way because they have that up connection pretty firmly established already. Okay, so notice that. Okay. Next, in. Both of these guys have well-established, well-cultivated communities around them. Remember I told you to put a pin in that one? So Saul has somebody to take him by the hand and guide him somewhere. So where does he end up? He ends up in a house of hospitality that's been established by Ananias' community, right? So there's a lot of well-wrought, close-in community around both Saul and Ananias. And these practices create a pathway for connection, for God to work through their relationships. There's a house that's open for Saul to rest and to pray. Right? That's pretty beautiful. It's not a set of gifts you receive overnight. They've been at work on these things. It takes practice. And both of these guys have put in the work. Okay. Finally, out. Both Saul and Ananias stretch way beyond their inner circles in the story. Right? Way. They're both crossing into enemy territory for this story to even begin to happen. Both of them have to go way outside their safety zones, their comfort spaces, into the turf of those people, to look for God to enter into their life through one of those people. And it happens. They're both willing to make that step. And that's courage, right? That's courage and the confident faith that God is guiding them. It comes through both of those previous practices. Having a supportive community, well-wrought, having a strong connection with the transcendent. Right? And it's a deeply challenging example for us, too. Right? Think for just a minute about who those people might be for you. Who are those people? What would it be like to follow the Spirit's guidance into conversation or even into an active, caring relationship with somebody who, is one of those people? It takes guts. It takes humility. Maybe it's someone at work or a person in the neighborhood or a family member even. Or someone just even in your past you may not have an active relationship with right now, but someone who has caused harm or has been a stumbling block to you in the past. It's one of those people, not just out there, but kind of in a little closer. Might it be possible that that relationship is an opening for grace? Maybe God is not done with you yet. Maybe there's something for you in creating a bridge into that enemy territory. Maybe there's something that needs to change in me so that grace can come pouring out through the channel of my life and to become a blessing for someone else, but also so that I may receive that blessing. It's just possible. All right. You get the drift? See where I'm going? See how this rubric, this sort of lens of up, in, and out can help us both connect to what God is doing in our lives, help us find our path towards growth, the place where the buds are just about to come open in our own spirits, in our own communities, in close and out there. It's my prayer that over the next weeks together, we are going to find those paths of growth together and that we will build some chops, some spiritual practices that will strengthen our connection to the transcendent, to God's work in the world around us, into those strong relationships within and around, and then creating these beautiful, strong channels for God's grace and love to pour out from us into the wider world. Up, in, and out. It's pretty simple. Possibilities are tremendous. We'll give it a try. Thanks be to God.